So let me just begin by saying, I want to give you a context of all this, because now we have 3 Sfarim. We have a Sefer al Torah and 2 Sfarim on Nevi'im and Ksuvim, okay? Including the Chamesh Megillot, of course. Now, I want to give you just a background. Rabbi Yaakov had writings of, I estimate, probably a little over 1,000 pages on Tanach, okay? That's 1,000 written pages, okay? Now, those pages are included in everything we're going to be learning, but there's much more than that. Besides that, it's based on certain articles that people wrote after hearing Rabbi Yaakov, and Rabbi Yosef Kamenetsky listened to a minimum of 500 recordings, okay? And he transcribed them, okay? So that all these different things that people wrote up about Rabbi Yaakov, of course, we worked hard on making sure that the people got it right and stuff like this. Of course, Rabbi Yosef Kamenetsky recorded what Rabbi Yaakov said in his speech, of course. So I'm not really worried about that. It's 100% correct, right? I also heard from Rabbi Yaakov certain things that may not be in the notes, okay? I sent you today a piece. Well, it says 1 and then it says 1b, because that piece I found later. Originally, I heard that piece from Rabbi Yaakov. I researched it in the Svarim, and Rabbi Yosef Kamenetsky had found it in an article that someone had published, and we'll talk more about that when we get to it. Okay, so that's what it's really based on. You have to know that even the stuff that Rabbi Yaakov wrote, he wrote at different times in his life. In other words, the same piece Rabbi Yaakov wrote over, what we see is one big piece. It was 10 different pieces over probably 20 years, okay? And Rabbi Yaakov refers you to, now look at page 516, now look at page 1804, right? Because he refers you to the other things that he wrote to get it all together, but he never put it together. So Rabbi Yosef Kamenetsky, and in some cases myself, I put it together. So that's what we're going to be seeing. Now, what does that really include? Number one, it includes Rabbi Yaakov's approach to learning Tanach. That's not going to be hashkafa, really. I mean, of course, in a bigger sense, it might be hashkafa, but you'll see how Rabbi Yaakov approaches understanding the bigger pictures of Tanakh, okay? You'll also see, obviously, some of Rabbi Yaakov's hashkafa, which we'll try to see today. I have 2 short pieces today because we're not going to be meeting next week because I have a wedding. So I didn't want to start a longer piece. Some of the pieces can be 10 pages long, okay? So that we need, week after week in order to get through them. Then there's, of course, we shouldn't forget, probably 20 to 25% of those 1,000 pages are grammar, okay? And grammar doesn't sound too exciting. We're going to try to make it a little bit more exciting. But when I travel, I may miss a shir or 2 here and there when I travel. I'm going to try to get Rabbi Yosef Kamenetsky to come and say a shir. And that's going to be a shir that you're never going to forget, okay? It's going to be on Digduk, because Rabbi Yosef Kamenetsky didn't only go through all of Digduk of Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Yaakov's approach to Digduk, because we think Digduk is like this thing you take out of a book. Rabbi Yaakov pushed it as chidushim on Digduk and the Negina of the Tanakh, okay? The only thing he didn't write on is the Negina of Eov, Mishlei, and Tehillim. He didn't write on that. The Digduk's a little bit different, so once in a while he'll mention it. But on the Digduk of the rest of the Tanakh, he has a lot of interesting things to say, and that we'll also eventually get to that as well. Okay, I want to make it a little more exciting at the beginning, so we won't do that at the beginning. Okay, so let's begin with the first piece. Now, the first piece is a famous piece. I have a lot to add in this piece. Some of it that I heard Baal Peh, and some of it that Rabbi Yosef Kamenetsky later recorded. Okay, when I feel that Rabbi Yaakov is really becoming a slabotker, I'm going to let you know. Okay, so let's begin. Vayishma Ruv vayetzileu miyadav. Right, the pasuk is Reuven came and he saved Joseph from being killed. I am b'yalkut shmoni shehevi vayikra rabba b'zeh halosha. Limadetachad Torah derech eretz kshehi adam ksheyehi adam osa mitzvah yehi osa so belev sameach. When a person does a mitzvah, right? Torah teaches us derech eretz, right? Over here, derech eretz doesn't mean so much the way of the world, but how to interact with certain things, and this is how to interact with a mitzvah. When a person does a mitzvah, he should do a belev sameach. By the way, in some of the texts that we have on this medrash, it says belev shalem, and in one of the texts we have in the medrash, I think maybe it's in the Yalkut Shmoni, it says belev sameach uvelev shalem. Okay, and obviously we're going to talk more about it, but there's significance in the word belev sameach, belev shalem. She'ilu hayodea Reuven, shakadosh baruch hu kosev acharav v'yishma Reuven v'yitzileu miyadam b'chseifav hayat to'ano malicho eitzelav. If Reuven would have known that Hashem is going to write about him, that Reuven heard and saved Joseph from the hands of his brothers, he would have brought him back on his shoulders to his father. Okay? Ilu haya Aaron yodea HaKadosh Baruch Hu kosev love hinehu yotzei lekrascha, right? Avasamach belibo, right? That Aaron's going to come out. He tells Moshe, God tells Moshe, Aaron's going to come out and be happy in his heart for you. If Aaron would have known they're going to write that about him in the Torah, but to pimbu mecholos hayotzel lekrascha, he would go out. He would have gone out with a 5-piece band. Basically, tupim u'mecholot, right? He wouldn't have just gone out to greet him with a leiv sameach, with being happy, samach belibo. He would have really brought a whole 5-piece band, right? Ilu Boaz yodea shekosev alav yitzpat lakoli agalot tumot hayamevi umechila. It says by Boaz that he took Ruth aside and he said, listen, come eat next to the people who are picking in the field, the kotzrim, right? And he made her some, popcorn. I mean, roasted the wheat, I would say it is today, right? So if he would have known they're going to write that about how he treated Ruth, because he actually picked out Ruth specially, right? He didn't pick out the other women who were coming to pick in the fields, right? He picked out Ruth, and if he would have known that the Tanach, in other words, here Shmuel would have written about him what he did. He would have brought, basically, he would have given her rib steaks, right? He would not have just given, her some roasted wheat. Okay. So what do we see? That previously, when someone did a mitzvah, the prophets used to write it. In the case of the Torah, Kadosh Baruch Hu wrote it, or Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it from God. And now that there's no Nevi'im, who writes it, right? So again, the Medrash takes for Dava Pashut that it's being written down, because the Medrash could have said, nobody writes it. I mean, now that there's no Tanach, nobody writes it. That's just who writes it. Eliyahu Mashiach write it. And that's a pasuk in Malachi, Kapitel Gimel is a pasuk. Ad Kanashar Medrash. Okay, I'm not going into the pasuk right now. We'll go more into the Medrash. By the way, Rabbi Yosef Kamenetsky, the article that he writes that mentions this is in Malachi. He stuck it there. We'll talk about that as we speak about this. So here, Rabbi Yaakov is going to say pshat. The obvious question in this medrash is, and Rabbi Yaakov spoke this out to me, and Rabbi Yosef has it in Malachi, that it sounds like if they would have known that it's going to be written about them, they would have done the mitzvah much nicer, right? That's what it feels like what it's saying over here, which is a little bit of a critique of Boaz and Aaron and Reuven. What do you mean? They would have done it nicer, and without it being written, they didn't do it so nice, right? So it's really a problem. And by the way, the Mefarshim asked this question on this medrash. So Rabbi Yaakov comes here and he tries to explain this medrash. I do want to say, Agav, this has nothing to do with Rabbi Yaakov, but the medrash itself, I have a little bit of a difficulty with it because I love the fact that it says Eliyahu writes it, because now we understand why Eliyahu was a person that never died, because he had to continue writing the nevuos, so to speak, after the Chasimas Tanach. Eliyahu Mashiach writing it sounds quite mystical, because I mean, I would have thought, what is Mashiach writing? He's not there yet, or if he is there, so why isn't he here? Right? It sounds like Mashiach is in the Olam HaEmes and he's writing things down, and eventually he's going to come, which could be, according to in the Kabbalistic world, such a thing. But according to the Pashtas, yeah, it's a little bit of a difficulty over here. Rabbi Yaakov does not discuss that part. Okay? In any event, but it does get a good haskama from a Kadosh Baruch Hu, right? Kadosh Baruch Hu chosim. So God decides that this is going into this book that we have. Right, we haven't seen it; hasn't been published yet, but there is a book being written ad hayom hazeh. Okay, so Rabbi Yaakov is going to try now to answer this, and he says like this: "Bi'al inyan lefianias daiti." By the way, this piece I'm almost positive it's in the Ksav Yad that I'm about to read you. Sheruvein v'gam Aaron uBoaz lo yodu shedover godol nasa ka'es al yidehem. They didn't know that something great is happening, a major thing is happening, a major event is happening through them. V'haya Ruvain doma shu matzil rak ach. What did Ruvain think? I'm saving my brother. He wasn't sitting and thinking, I'm saving Yosef HaTzadik from something. I'm saving my brother. You know, he's in a panic. They want to kill Yosef. He wants to save his brother. That's what he thought he's doing, which is a nice thing. But that's all he thought he's doing. But if he actually would have brought him back, right, to his father, there wouldn't have been a Golus Mitzrayim. Okay, that's what Rabbi Yaakov says. He doesn't explain how he knows that. Okay, but I do want to say, if you check the Ramban, I don't remember where the Ramban writes it. The Ramban writes, the Mechiras Yosef caused the Golus Mitzrayim. Now, even though we know, he says Avram Avinu already was Nigzar in time of Avram Avinu that they could have a Golus Mitzrayim, but he says actually how it worked out was through Yosef. Okay, and that could have been, in a sense, that could have been spared on a certain level. V'chein shlichuso shel Moshe leParo hayagam kein. Inyan chashuv l'maod sharei kol haTorah kula tluya b'yitzias Mitzrayim, and the shlichus of Moshe leParo was very, very chashuv. So the beginning of that shlichus, Rabbi Yaakov is implying, Aaron would have come up with a 5-piece band. This is Geulas Mitzrayim we're talking about now, the beginning of Geulas Mitzrayim, which is going to lead to Kabbalas HaTorah, right? But what did Aaron think? All Aaron really thought is that I'm coming to meet my brother who I haven't seen in so many years, right? And I'm so happy to finally see my brother who I didn't even know, who knows what happened to him, right? So he looked at it as a family event, just like Reuven. Masu shel Boaz hu inyan shel leidas David hamelech olav hashalom Mashiach, and also the give and take of Boaz, meaning Boaz spoke to Ruth. He told her to only go to his field, right? He was having Rachmanis on a Gioris who came from a different country, right? And was very uncomfortable. That's what the chesed he was doing with her, which that's what we do with a ger, obviously. A ger we have to be very sensitive to. We see he was extremely sensitive, and we can learn, obviously, this concept of being sensitive to a ger from Boaz. And when they were involved in their chesed, whether it's Ruvain's chesed or Boaz's chesed or Aaron's feeling positive about Moshe, they didn't make so much out of it. They were just human beings, right? Rabbi Yaakov was saying, sof kol sof, they're human beings with the proper love for brothers and gerim. Rabbi Yaakov now becomes a lamdin, and he says it's better to say that their action will become Torah. That they didn't know. They knew their action is a chesed, but that it'll actually become part of Torah, that they couldn't even fathom. Torah that right, the Torah and the Nevi'im are going to bring this Ladoris. Could you imagine every person studying this, right? Studying the story of Ruth, right? Anyone studying that Sefer is going to see this Ladoris, what Boaz did. They couldn't even fathom that. Yodim story, who, if they knew that this is an idea of history, here, I'm not exactly sure what Rabbi Yaakov is saying, but he says, I mean, I understand what he's saying, but Vadai, if they knew that this was a historical event, Shahayu miyapim epniusam, they would have beautified the depth, shagam habar that even the outside, like bar, like brighter bar, right? Bar, right? The yiyu godel erech, the should have a larger value, meaning he would have come with a 5-piece band. He would have made steaks for her. He would have brought her back to his father, right? They didn't realize that what they're about to do has historical ramifications. It has Torah ramification, historical ramification. Sharei inyan ledorasu. Ulefikach saimu chazal shegam ata al yedama adam shekiven shaTorah kvar chatuma ein shum chashivas v'maisim. Maybe since the Tanach is already written, so my actions aren't that important, right? Ela lochein adover. Kol ma'aseh tov shel Yehudi hu inyan shel chativas atida shel hayadusi. Every action, every good action of a Jew, right? Any Jew, right? Hu inyan shel chativas atida shel hayadusi. It is a chativa, formation of, it's forming the future of the Jewish people. Ad shel yom Mashiach asukim b'ktiva of Kodesh Baruch Hu. So much so, it's so chashuv that Eliyahu and Mashiach are involved in it. Klomar atido shel Yisrael, right? It's the future of the Jewish people. In other words, what we're also doing is writing the future of the Jewish people. And I remember Rabbi Yaakov saying this to me in the following way. He said, someone gets stuck up. He doesn't really know how that stuck is being used. In other words, a guy is giving stucco for a family, right? And we don't know that because the person had stuck, he was able to feed his child properly, and that child was sitting and eventually grew up to be a Talmid Chacham, and that Talmid Chacham eventually had a family from which great Talmid Chacham came, and eventually Mashiach came from that family. Why? Because of that stuck it gave. But let me give you a real case that I believe that if I said it to Rabbi Yaakov, he would love it. Okay, I'll give you a real case of this. I think maybe you know about this, but my uncle records in the making of a gadol. I remember Rabbi Yaakov, speaking about this in a larger context. But I'll tell you what the story is. There was a fellow by the name of Reb Noach Axengrund. Okay, did anyone ever hear of Reb Noach Axengrund? Not really. Okay, he was a butcher in Minsk. Okay, in Belarus, the capital of Belarus was Minsk. He was a butcher in Minsk, right? And Reb Reuven Grozovsky, who was learning in Slobodka, he was a bit older than Reb Aaron Kotler and Reb Yaakov. He came back, if I'm not mistaken, for Pesach, home to Belarus, and the Alter told him that I heard that there are a number of very brilliant kids in Minsk, and if you see that they're willing to come to Slobodka, like, get them to come. Okay, so he went, and if I remember correctly, he went to speak to Rabbi Yaakov's parents and Rabbi Aaron's parents. Rabbi Aaron's not parents. I think Rabbi Aaron didn't have parents. He had an uncle, an aunt, Actually, I had a sister as well, and they took care of him. Don't forget, when they came to Slobodki, he was Sachkol 15 and a half years old. I think Rabbi Yaakov was 15 and a half, Rabbi Aaron was 15. And which was unusual. Okay, they usually came 17, 18. Now, what happened was the parents weren't willing to pay for them to go to Slobodka. So they went to this fellow, Reb Noach Oxengrund. Okay, he was a butcher. Okay, so let's hold off with that story for a second. Okay, Reb Noach sat and he thought about it for a minute, and then he opened up the cash register and he gave the money for them to go to Slobodka. Okay, let's fast forward.
This is the guy who went to Tel Aviv.
Right, the guy went to Tel Aviv. Reb Shmuel, what was his name? Rav Shapiro was his name. I think his name was Shmuel Shapiro, but I don't remember for sure. Rav Shapiro. He became a Rav later. He was learning in Lakewood, and Rabbi Aaron sent him to learn in Eitz Chaim by his father-in-law, Rabbi Zalman Meltzer. Okay, so he was learning in Eretz Yisrael, and for Shabbos he went to Tel Aviv. Okay, and he wanted to buy something, so he stopped at a kiosk. Now we're talking in the early 50s, probably. And he stopped at a kiosk, and he saw that the guy had a nice long beard, and the guy was sitting and learning in the kiosk who had the kiosk. Today we picture kiosk with someone from the Eidam Mizrach with a chain, and 3 buttons open, right? In those days, most of the kiosks were being run by Ashkenazim and not by Eidam Mizrach. Right, so this guy was sitting there with a big kippah, black kippah, and a long beard, and he's learning something. So he goes over to look. He sees he's learning Mishnayos Zroim. Okay, and he right before he starts the conversation with him, someone walks over to buy cigarettes, and he says to the guy, Reb Noach, who has the kiosk, Reb Noach Oxengrund has the kiosk. He says to the guy, I don't sell cigarettes after Chatzos on Friday. So this fellow, Rav Shapiro, thought this fellow was very interesting. He doesn't sell cigarettes on a kiosk after Chatzos on Friday. So he goes over to start talking to him. So Rav Noach asks him, so where are you from? He says, from America. He says, so what are you doing here? I'm learning by Rabbi Zalman Meltzer. So he says, did you learn in America before? He says, yeah, I learned by Baron Cutler, his son-in-law. So he starts laughing, and he says, Rav Shapiro says to him, why are you laughing? He says, because I sent for Baron Cutler to Lakewood, to Slobodka. I sent for Baron Cutler to Slobodka. So the guy, Rav Shapiro says, he told this to my grandfather, I started to laugh. I said, how could you send Baron Cutler here? He says, I was a butcher in Muncie, and I paid the money for the train to Slobodka. He tells him like this. And the guy, was like in state of shock. He didn't. So, and later on, he met Rabbi Yaakov in Florida, and he told him, because Reb Noach Oxengrund said to him, I paid the money for Baron Cutler, and for another kid also. So later on, when he told Rabbi Yaakov the story, because Rabbi Yaakov used to go to Florida, and he was a Rav in Florida, Rav Shapiro. His son, by the way, took over his shul. He's a very charismatic guy in Florida today. So you may have heard of him. I don't remember his first name. Also Rav Shapiro. So when he told over Rabbi Yaakov told him, he didn't tell you who the other guy was, but it was me. I was the other fellow who he paid for. Okay, so take a look at this story. Okay, the man was asked to take out money from the cash register. What did he think at that time? He thought he's going to send 2 Bocharim to Slobodka Yeshiva. That's it. Okay, he didn't realize that there's a yeshiva today called Lakewood, 7,000 students. Okay, the largest yeshiva in America, one of the largest yeshivas in the world. Okay, or Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, who was, after Rabbi passed away, he was considered amongst Moshe Feinstein. Rabbi Yaakov was considered Gedolei Torah of America. He definitely did not think I'm sending 2 Gedolei Torah to Slobodka. That he didn't think, he couldn't imagine. Okay. By the way, when Rabbi Yaakov came to Eretz Yisrael, he asked to go visit him, but he had already passed away. So Rabbi Yaakov asked him to find the children, and he sat with the children to thank them for what his father had done. Okay, so that's a real example today of doing something you think is a very local chesed, and eventually becomes out to change the world, basically. Okay, that's what he's saying over here. So what is the Medrash over here saying? That every one of us, right? That's what Rabbi Yaakov was sort of driving at. That's what he says at the end, right? Right? That's the famous line. That's the line you have to get over here, right? And when the Medrash says that when you do a mitzvah, you should do it either b'leiv sameach, b'leiv shalom, that's what the Medrash means. That you should do it with a complete heart. You shouldn't okay, I have to do a mitzvah, so I do a mitzvah. No, I should be looking that when I do this mitzvah, b'leiv shalom, I should do it, meaning I don't know what can come out of this mitzvah. Who knows? How many, we can't see it, but how much does it really affect? How many people and how many doras does it really affect such a thing, right? Rabbi Yaakov, when he had to be maspid, Rav Wolga learned this, Zechron Livracha, who gave him the job for 6 months in Seattle, Washington. He saved Rabbi Yaakov's life, basically, and his family, because if he hadn't got that job, he would have gone back to Lithuania. So what did he think? He thought he's giving Rabbi Yaakov 6 months of, take his place because he was on sabbatical. That's what he thought. He didn't realize who he's saving over here, right? Rabbi Yaakov got up. My mother told me, I wasn't at the Levaya, but my mother told me, Rabbi Yaakov got up to speak, and he couldn't speak. He started to cry, and he walked down, couldn't speak. Because he had such a chorus atov for what he did, Pasha didn't have words to say about him. In any event, that's the idea over here. And I know many stories like this where people think that they're doing a mitzvah because a mitzvah came into their hands, right? But really, you have to be thinking right before you do that mitzvah, right? I need muchen to change the world. B'leiv shalom or b'leiv sameach. Okay, that is. So now I heard from Rabbi Yaakov something oral, which I found last night by Rabbi Yosef Kamenetsky. Okay, now this is
what page is that?
That is page 1b. I wrote Shin Nun Vav in Trei Aser in Malachi. Okay. So this piece I had heard from Rabbi Yaakov together with the first piece. He had told it to be orally. Okay, so keep going because it's, I think, the last.
It may be a separate document. No, it's a separate document. Yeah. Hold on, I'll open that.
She didn't send it together?
No, they were sent to me separately.
Okay, but
yeah,
this is a piece in Trei Aser. I only took a small part of the piece, right? This piece, Rabbi Yosef Kamenetsky heard on a recording from Rabbi Yaakov. By the way, Rabbi Yosef Kamenetsky is a scholar, so he writes exactly where he hears the pieces from. Whereas on Chumash, you don't really know which piece is Ksav Yad and which piece may be something from an article or something from a recording. So this is from an article. This is from a recording that Rabbi Yosef Kamenetsky heard. I'm only bringing you a piece of it. It's a very interesting article. It's not really relevant so much to the pasuk over here, a little bit relevant to the pasuk, and maybe at a different point we'll do the article. But this point is very, very relevant. You saw I underlined on page Shin Nun Vav, V'nira dezeh kavonas hamishna el perik beis mishnah aleph. Okay? I was floored when Rabbi Yaakov said this to me. Okay? Histakel b'shlosh dvarim ve'enat haboli de avera. Right? Dama l'mayla mimcha, ayin ro'av ozen shamas, v'chol ma'asecha b'sefer nichtavim. Okay? Rabbi Yaakov said, I disagree with all the Mefarshim that say this is the sefer of, Sifrei Tzadikim, Sifrei Rishayim. It's not that sefer. Okay? And here, take a look with Rabbi Yaakov. You're going to see it in writing. This is what Rabbi Yaakov told me. V'nira, dezel gam kavonas ha'mishnah le'el Perek Beis Mishnah V'Stakel B'Shlosh Dvarim V'Yato Bar Avera. Dama L'Mayla Mimcha Ayin Rovos Shamas Chol Maasecha B'Sefer Nichtavim. D'Lechora Temua Ksivazu Amay Nitzracha. Why do you need this someone to write, God to write it in, right? It has to be written in. God is writing it in, so to speak. We look at it, like it says, like, what do we say in Zichronos? All right? By the way, Rabbeinu Yonah Novis asks this question, and he starts questioning for an answer on it, because he learns it's the Sifrei Tzadikim and Rishayim. So he doesn't say the question, he says, Ki'ilu Kasuv B'Sefer. It's as if it's written in the Sefer. That's how clear it is to God that it's as if. But of course, God doesn't need the Sefer. So that's Rabbi Yaakov's question. What do you mean? Ayin Rom Ozen Shamas. What does that mean? That means Hashkacha Pratis, right? There's a God, Lamala, and there's Hashkacha Pratis. Right? Do you need more than that? Of course, it's Hashkacha Pratis. God's going to take account. The Mishnah is telling me, don't think your actions are not choshev. Every one of your actions is choshev, and it's written in a sefer. Umuduyak basefer nechtava beheya yediyah. It's not according to the Pashup Shot in the Mishnah, it just means God is writing it up till the Esap Kida, until the Yom Hadin, right? And then he can erase it already, right? But it's only like it's only like not a real sefer. It's just like sort of, according to Rabbeinu Yonah, it's not a sefer at all. And even if you learn it is a sefer, it's not a sefer that lasts. It's just talking about your din v'cheshbon, right? And that comes to an end. He says, no, v'lo rak be'ez pinka sheyeh l'zikoron aris pkida, elenichta b'sefer shukoron bo tamid beha-sefer. That sefer it's a real sefer. It's not just it's not just a couple of notes that God made to remember what you did. Kedugma mashenem b'medrash hanal sha'avar haya adam osa mitzvah nivim kosmos osa dahainu sheniach chelik mikitvei hakodesh v'chein hasefer hazeh shekol adam kosev b'maisav, right? Shekol adam kosev b'maisav. This sefer that every person writes with his actions, right? Korim bo lamala ba'olamot is being read lamala in the worlds above. That sefer that's what's happening. In other words, so it's not connected v'ayin rosa v'ozen shamas with the Yom Hadin. It's not connected with the Yom Hadin. It's connected. It's a completely different idea. It's a Slabotka idea. Know that your actions are so important that they're being written up. That's what Rabbi Yehuda Nossi is saying over here. Dama lamala, know that it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I know some Shmais is Shkacha Pratis, and know everything you do counts, and therefore you should do it. You should make sure you do it. In fact, Rabbi Yosef Kamenetsky brings at the bottom, he says, 1, 2, 3 lines in, Ulam, Rabbeinu Mefarish Kapirish Hamuva b'Medrash Shmuel. The Medrash Shmuel is from Shmuel, what's his name? Azida. Shmuel Azida, who lived a Talmud of he's a Talmud of the Arizal. He lived in the 1500s in Tzfat, right? And he wrote a sefer. He wrote a number of svarim, but Medrash Shmuel is on Pirkei Avos. He quotes a lot of different commentaries, right? So he says, "V'chol ma'asecha b'sefer nichtavim ha-mitzvah shata oseh." Not ma'asecha means the mitzvahs, not the averos, the mitzvahs. V'akavana l'archiv lev ha'oseh. This is to broaden the heart of the one who does it. K'mo she'amru Chazal. Ilu ha'yodei Ruvain ha'yomelichak sefer lavin. He actually quotes that medrash over here, exactly what Rabbi Yaakov said. Now, of course, Rabbi Yaakov never used any commentaries. Rabbi Yaakov, if he quoted the Mishnah, he either quoted the Rav or the Tosus Yontif or the Tiferes Yisrael. So he definitely did not see this, but he was mechaven that's exactly that sefer is what Rabbi Yehuda Nasi here is talking about. Okay, that's the first piece. The second piece. Now, the second piece is on Sefer Rus. That's already in the Nach, right? That's page 2 I wrote above, right? And this is really very much a piece on how Rabbi Yaakov viewed teaching, okay? This is a very interesting piece. There's some interesting parts to it. They could take a look at the whole piece, but there's interesting parts as well. And it says like this. First, he quotes, Rabbi Kamenetsky quotes what Rabbi Yaakov is going on, and he says that this is a sikha that Rabbi Yaakov gave for divrei chizuk lebein hazmanim. This is for talmidim who are involved in, who want to do kiruv bein hazmanim. During the zman, they're in yeshiva, and bein hazmanim, they want to go out there and be makarev, kids and stuff like this. So Rabbi Yaakov gave this shit parsem. It says in number 8, shis parsem of Bakola Torah Choveres Ayin Dalet of Tufshin Ayin Beis, meaning it first was written up Tufshin Ayin Beis, but it was a sikha. He said, and I could tell you for a fact, I've heard much of this from Rabbi Yaakov as well. Okay, now we're going to go through that other piece, but I don't want to go through it yet because it's a really heavy-duty piece. Number 8 is a very heavy-duty piece. But we'll go through the piece first, on top. Hine, mitchila shteyem gam rus gam orpa hayu bedas echad litztaref im nomi b'chazarasu le'eretz Yisrael. Behold, at the beginning, both wanted to go with Nomi to Eretz Yisrael. Ela shenomi dibra al libon lishaer b'moav. Nomi said to them 3 times, Lech shovna. Go back to where you are. For us, nifredu darchechem, and then their ways split. Meaning, Ruth did one thing, Orpah did another. Tishak Orpah lechamos, Ruth dofkaba. Usof ma'isaya the Orpah shov el amav Eloah. Right? She returned to her nation and to her gods, meaning to avodah zarah. That's what it says. It says that Nomi said to Ruth, "Do what Orpah did. Go back to your nation and to the gods." By the way, this is a raya that they didn't yet convert, because if they converted, Nomi would not be allowed to say to go back to your God, right? So this is a raya. There's a machlokus rishonim about it. I'm pretty sure Rashi holds they were not begayer yet. Ve'ilu Rus tofkaba, the tzarach bir. Ma rasa Rus lidobek ba. Why did Rus decide? Hare lo rasa v'lo shamat klum me'am Yisrael. Behold, Rus never heard anything. She never saw Eretz Yisrael, and she never heard anything about Am Yisrael. What is it? There's a family who got, who after the father died, the 2 sons, Machlon and Chilion, married these 2 women, right? But what did they know about Eretz Yisrael? They didn't know nothing about it. Obviously, there was a Rav. They're not going to be selling, wheat to chutzlaritz when they don't have their own, right? You have to say that they didn't gain their appreciation of Yadus from anyone except Nomi. Vim came tzorach bir halo gam Orpah hayula kochas gedolim kamosha Chazal gilulanu hakochas hayitmunu ba'Orpah. In other words, Orpah also had certain great kochot, as Chazal tell us, right? And here you see Rabbi Yaakov holds that the fact that Goliath came out of Orpah shows that she had big schuyot, which is interesting. Ba'azva et Nomi ba'ota alayli zinta imea b'nei adam v'nis abro mizen nolad Goliath haplishti she'omad mul kol klal Yisrael. On that night, the Medrash says, right? We're not going into what this Medrash means now because it's a little bit of a pella. She leaves Nomi, and that night she has intimacy with 100 different men. Vinit Abra, and she becomes pregnant, and Goliath is born from there. Sha'amad Mul Kol Klal Yisrael. That's the important part. He stands in front of Klal Yisrael, and for 40 days he scares them to death. For that you have to have a schus. What is the difference between Arpa and Ruth? And Rabbi Yaakov is coming now to say a little bit of a chiddush. Vabirhu there's two types of ways one can be madrich someone. One can educate someone, right? One chinuch. One is called. That's the next page. Chinuch shin samach gimel. Beis hashpa'ah. And I heard this from Rabbi Yaakov many times. Right? Chinuch pirusha shetzorach leilach eitzla mischanich lavin matzavo bazeh yuchal lachancho ulanhigo. The first idea of chinuch is to go to the one who you want to be mechanech, lahavin matzavo, to see how he's like, ukazeh yuchal lachancho ulanhigo, and then you can be mechanech him. This is a very important idea in itself, by the way. Even though Rabbi Yaakov doesn't discuss it here, he discussed it with me at great length. Meaning, a Rebbe can't be mechanech a child until he knows who the child is. Else, you can't be mechanech 20 kids and just assume they're all alike. Okay? So Rabbi Yaakov would get into the kishkis of the student and then decide what he needed, right? Which, of course, that was, of course, much more of the outer Slabotka type of idea that he got to know each student, right? So that's Leilach Eitzel Meschanech Lavin Matzavo. Where's he holding? Kamosha Manhigim Shar. Like you, Lahavdil, you're Manhig a Shar. You teach the Shar how to plow the field. You guide him and how to plow the field. But Hashba is a whole different idea of chinuch. It's from mishupa is something that is, a leaning, or something that is shipua is when something is coming downwards, right? A mountain has shipua. The kamo gag shu mishupa v'geshem yored al agag v'amayim nishpachim al over tachtov ein agag yudea shu zolef mayim. The roof doesn't really know that it is spilling water on somebody who's walking beneath. It's spilling water, right? Because it is the roof is not straight. The roof is on a shipua. Of course, and now the rain comes down and may hit somebody. You don't want to educate the next one. What's happening is that the person, the way he acts, right? That is the thing that is influencing, yashpia, right? Influencing the other person. Right, and when the second one sees who he's with, that outstanding person he's with, that's the way he gets educated. Meaning, the guy didn't say a word to him. By the way, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, when he was asked, did he learn by Rabbi Yosef Zundel, his Rebbe? He says, I never learned by him. I saw him. That's what it is. In other words, just seeing great people sometimes is mashpia tremendously. Okay, we're running out of time, so I think we'll take this part up in probably just to finish it up in 2 weeks, because I have a lot to say about this. When you get a chance, take a look at the article I gave you for Rav Soloveitchik, and you'll see Rav Soloveitchik understands that there's in the father and mother in the home, the father is mashpia through chinuch, and the mother is mashpia through example. Okay, and he writes it about his own father or mother. Okay, that's the difference. One is mashpia through I educate you, and the other one is I educate you through example. Right? He looked at his mom and he became educated. Try to read through that piece. It's an excellent piece. You'll see it's exactly what Rabbi Yaakov's saying. But his claim is That's the woman's stake in Talmud Torah, is to be a mashpia, not a machanechet, but a mashpia through the fact how she acts in the home, and that was his mother.